Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Dynamic Dialogue for June. Today, we're going to talk about follow up a little bit on a webinar I did a couple months ago on the war in Ukraine. And specifically today, we're going to look at some of the companies that are doing and continue to do business in Russia, and some that have chosen not to or are on their way out or greatly diminished. So for those of you who might not be familiar, this is our monthly Dynamic Dialogue webinar. We do this the fourth Thursday of every month at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. We talk about lots of different things, and we are always interested in suggestions for presentations and interested in your thoughts, ideas on the topics that we represent. We have a YouTube channel, so everything gets posted there. And if you join us, the link is good, or if the YouTube link has lots of different presentations on it, so you're welcome to check those out at any time. So let's talk about this situation. We all know that Russia invaded the Ukraine in about mid-February. There's been a lot of sanctions that were issued, some sanctions issued initially, and then they've been increased several times. They're not just US sanctions, these are from very many countries across the world. This is one of the few areas that many countries have been united on in their protesting and denouncing Russia for trying to annex basically the Ukraine. They did this in Crimea a few years ago, and they decided to do it again. So it's not approved by anyone except Russia, pretty much. We looked at this before and found that there's over 2,100 US companies and 1,200 EU firms that have tier one Russian suppliers in various shapes and forms. Over 450 US suppliers and over 200 EU firms have tier one Ukrainian suppliers. So you might not have them at your company, but know that there are lots of companies that do, both Europe and, both Russia and Ukrainian. And at the tier three level, there's over 190,000 US and 109,000 EU firms that have suppliers either in Russia or the Ukraine. Those are in the form of software. There's a lot of programmers and coders that are from the Ukraine area, and companies have been employing those, happily employing those for several years. They are customer service people, so there's quite a few of those, trading and distribution, and then industrial machinery. And there's some other implications with that, with what the Ukraine and Russia produce in terms of agriculture, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So I'm going to share with you this article I found from, it was a YLE study, and they have looked at over 1,200 companies, and they produced this initially, I think, in the March timeframe. They've updated it again, and recently in last week, I believe. Yeah, it was published last week, and I'm expecting them to do that again probably in July or early August. So they have graded these companies in terms of A to F. So any of us remember back to our academic years and studies, there's a lot of different grades, but basically I'll start at the bottom and say the A rating goes to companies who have totally halted Russian engagements and fully exited from Russia. B grades go to those companies who have curtailed most or nearly all, at least temporarily. Many of these companies have stopped a lot of activity, but they haven't shut down and haven't kind of closed that door, so they're keeping their return options open. C grades mean they are scaling back significantly in some areas, but they have other areas that are continuing. And you'll see some of those companies produce things like food and medical supplies. So you kind of understand that they are continuing those essential businesses and humanitarian businesses. D companies are holding off investments and development, but they're continuing business a lot as usual. And F companies are ones that are really defying all the demands for exiting or reducing any activities. So as I said, there's a groundswell of universal strength to support the Ukraine and to discourage companies from doing business in Russia, from to actually put sanctions on in any way, shape, or form that they can be put on, and to actually try to punish financially Russia for invading the Ukraine. So let's take a look at some of the industries. All of these companies were classified into 12 industries. So you can see anything from communication services to utilities, some real estate, healthcare, financial. So lots of different types of industries that these companies fell into. And we'll look at these different categories. So I'm going to start with the business as usual companies. These are 246 companies rated out of this study. 35 across 35 countries. So these are by no means just United States companies. Most companies by country in this category, it was China. China had 41 companies that have really said business as usual. So they're keeping their ties very closely to Russia. The US has 30 companies in this area that are business as usual. France 26 and Germany 23. The other countries are less than 20 companies from there, but there you can see it's across 35 countries. So some of these are onesie twosie kinds of things. Some of the significant countries from the United States, I focused in this slide on the United States because I thought some of these were interesting. Carl's Jr. and Hard Rock cafes are still operating. So a little bit different take there. Carl's Jr. fast food kinds of things, but the Hard Rock Cafe, a restaurant, but they're continuing business as usual. So is International Paper. They are continuing to operate. Koch Industries, this is one of the largest, if not the largest privately owned company in the United States, and encompasses a whole range of things. They still are operating, but they are considering exit options. And I've seen a couple articles recently where they are actually taking action to do some things, like there's a big glass manufacturer there, one of the largest in the world, I believe, that they are actually shutting down and moving things from. So they are actually taking action, which would probably raise their grade, but I didn't change it because I did not assign the grades. I got the grades from this study, but they are moving towards doing some exit and closing things down. Medtronic, it's a local company here in Los Angeles. We have some Medtronic facilities, but they are a worldwide global company. They're still operating. It's a subsidiary in Russia, but it is still operating. TGI Fridays is still operating. And I found this one interesting, Tupperware. Not only operating, but they're actively hiring as well. So you can see a lot of different companies doing different things, but these are still pretty much continuing business as usual. I found it interesting that there were some food companies in there, 3 of these, and of course, out of this is a handful of the 30 US companies that are there, but I tried to pick kind of a cross section to show you what types of companies are there. So now let's take a look at the degraded companies. There were 160 companies in this category across 11 industries. None of these companies were real estate companies. So they had the other 11 industries that I shared with you. 31 countries total. US, Germany, and France all had over 10 companies on this list, and all the other companies were less than 10, or the other countries had less than 10 companies, and the US led the pack with 41. So this is not only US, but other countries of note, because I'm sure some of these are familiar to you, even if they are not US companies. So Abbott Labs, in case you don't know, Abbott, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got this right. So Abbott Labs has suspended their non-essential business, but they are continuing what they deem essential. Airbus, significant because of the plane and the parts and the maintenance and everything. So they've suspended their parts supply, but they are still continuing to buy a lot of titanium, although they are looking for alternatives. They have not yet established that. And if you don't know, I'll show you a little bit later, titanium is not found in very many places in the world, and Russia has been a big producer of that for many years. Archer Daniels Midland, they are scaling down their non-essential business, but they are a lot associated with agriculture and farm work. So they haven't done very much. AstraZeneca, Bristol Myers, Eli Lilly, GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, most of those have halted their clinical trials. AstraZeneca has halted investments. Bristol Myers Squibb has paused their trials, and they're not enrolling new participants, but they are actively hiring. So there's just a mixed bag in here, but most of these companies still have a pretty significant amount of work going on in Russia. Bayer and Colgate Palmolive. So Bayer is, I believe, a German company. Colgate Palmolive, they've stopped their non-essential business, but if you know Colgate Palmolive, they make a lot of things, soaps and toothpaste and personal hygiene kinds of things. And Bayer, of course, makes aspirin and lots of other things in the medical. So they're only stopping what they consider non-essential businesses. A lot of what they do, they say, is essential. So you could argue with that, or you could say, yes, I understand what they're doing, and I would agree with that. So it's you can kind of take your own perspective on that. Here's interesting. Michael Kors, Jimmy Choo, and Versace, they are not taking online orders, but they're actively advertising. So I kind of find that interesting. And these are luxury goods. These are not Colgate Palmolive types of personal hygiene toothpaste you need. These are luxury goods. So they're changing their order system, but they're still advertising. Cargill, another farm tool and machinery company, scaling down, again, non-essential business. More food, Domino's and Subway. Domino's has suspended their royalty payments, but both these companies are still in operation. Hotels, Hilton, Hyatt, Intercontinental have, Hilton closed their corporate office there and suspended investments. And that's what we're seeing a lot from Hyatt in the Intercontinental too. They're suspending their investments and development, but they're continuing to operate there. Kimberly-Clark, maker of a lot of like Kleenex and toilet paper and diapers, Huggies diapers, and lots of stuff. And Kraft Heinz suspended investments. So again, personal use type food and products, home care products, toilet paper, Kleenex. So they suspended investments, but they are still continuing to do pretty much what they've been doing. Procter Gamble and Red Bull I found interesting. And I found out Red Bull is not a US owned company. I did not know that. But they have scaled back operations, no new investment, but they are continuing to work there. Procter & Gamble is similar to Colgate Palmolive, and they make a ton of things. They make all kinds of soap and cleaning products and toothpaste and all kinds of things. So lots and lots of products fall under that Procter & Gamble P&G brand. And then Red Bull, of course, we all are familiar with Red Bull, whether you like it or not. You are familiar with it, and they have their ads, but they're still continuing to sell within Russia. So these are the companies that got graded C. In this category, there were 169 companies, 11 different industries, again, no real estate, across 35 countries. US had 66 of these companies, Germany 22, and everybody else was less than 10. So it fell off quite quickly in that regard. But if you look at 88 out of 169, you've got 50% of your company, or of the companies right there. This is a long list, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but some of these I thought were interesting. Activision and Epic Games, they've suspended new games and sometimes in-game sales, but they're still doing business there. Adobe has suspended new sales, but they continue with their current customer base. So does Belarus. Alphabet, Shutterstock, some internet type companies there. They've withdrawn their ops in Moscow and not taking new customers, but they're continuing with current customers. And you'll see that a lot in this category, where they're really hanging on to the customers they have, but they've shut down new customers or they're suspending parts of their businesses. Amgen, a big medical company that's close to me here in this Southern California area. And then Ingersoll Rand. So they are continuing to deliver medical goods and critical health services, but they've suspended what they consider non-essential. Avaya, an internet company, limited services, but they're maintaining agreements. Bacardi, I thought was interesting on here. Boston Scientific and Dow's another big material supplier, plastics and lots of other things, but a lot of plastics. You know, again, this category is about companies that are suspending investments, scaling back, cutting significant operations, as both of these companies have cut their non-essential work. Carrier, Microsoft, and SAP, no new business, but they've got lots of agreements there, and they are continuing to fulfill their agreements. And SAP is even going a little bit farther and doing some carve outs and trying to be selective about what they do. Another agriculture manufacturer equipment, Caterpillar, suspending minor manufacturing facilities, but they're still selling. So a lot of these companies are looking at what their competition is doing, and then they're aligning or not aligning with that. Coke, Pepsi, and Whirlpool, Coke and Pepsi, very similar, have suspended a lot of their operations there. Coke has a coffee chain. I forget, I think it's Costas Coffee, but I'm not sure about the name. They're continuing some of that. They are continuing some of their essential goods. Pepsi makes some things like some dairy products and some other things. Whirlpool makes things for the home. So they are doing some essential kinds of work, but they are cutting back. Deere, again, a competitor of Caterpillar and some others. Eaton, another manufacturer of lots of different types of products used in construction, used in machinery, used lots of places. They've suspended shipments into Russia. They aren't really cutting ties yet, but they have suspended parts and a lot of support into that. So Gap, Dunkin' Donuts, Baskin Robbins, you see they've stopped. Some of these are franchisees. They're doing different things. Some of them are stopping online sales. You'll see Eaton in there with GE. They are competitors in some things. General Mills and Kellogg is in there. Mars, candy bars, they're winding down. Goldman Sachs is winding down, but they're buying Russian debt as they're doing it. Halliburton, suspending new business. And Philip Morris, one of the interesting ones, tobacco type products. They say they're exploring strategic alternatives. They have paused ads and they're not doing any new product launches, but they still have a lot going on there. The B companies, there's 500 of these in 50 different countries. So I told you that the getting out of Russia has strong support, 50 different countries represented in these 500 companies. And that's a lot of companies, 500. 12 industries, all the industries we looked at on that one slide. 141 of these are US, UK 40, Germany 40, Japan 32, and Sweden and France 22. Everybody else is under 20. So these are companies like DirecTV and Disney. Paramount is in there, Warner, TikTok and Twitter. So they've really suspended business in there. Airbnb is in there. Costco, Crocs, eBay, Ford and GM are in there with Goodyear and Harley Davidson. You'll see things, companies, some of the hotel companies and Airbnb and Marriott are in this area. Shoes, both New Balance and Nike. Clothing, Levi's, Victoria's Secrets. You'll see two pizza companies in there, Papa John's and Little Caesars. So they're really suspending a lot of business. Burger King, Clorox. Again, when you look at cleaning products and a wide range of products, that's them. Estee Lauder, makeup and a lot of women's products that way. Chevron and Valero, both gasoline companies, financial, American Express and Citibank, product manufacturers, electronics, a lot of things, Danaher, Thermo Fisher and Waters. More airlines in this one, three, Alaska Air, American Air, United Airlines, all have suspended routes into and out of Russia. Boeing has suspended, and Boeing's quit buying titanium from Russia. So they found other sources for that. 3M has suspended their operations, and they sell a wide range of products, everything from adhesives to sandpapers to office products and lots of things in between. Honeywell, Raytheon, UL, UPS. And then there's a lot of internet companies and electronic companies, Apple, Coupa, Dell, NetApps, Oracle, PayPal. A lot of these companies are in there. NVIDIA, electronics again, some software companies like Grammarly, Intel and Intuit both have suspended. These companies have typically suspended things, but they do keep a door open in case this gets resolved amicably, that they can go back in there. And then you're seeing DuPont. This is the National Hockey League, so they're in there too with a lot of other of these companies. So it's a wide range of companies that are really saying, hey, we don't like what's going on and we're going to take our business elsewhere. And then finally, the A companies, 297 of these, 12 industries, 29 countries. Most by country, US at the 107, Germany 43, or UK 43, excuse me, Germany 21, Finland 20. Finland, this is a lot of companies for Finland, who doesn't have a lot of international companies comparatively because of the size. Sweden and Poland are both in there at 17, and France is at 22. So lots of different, everything else is less than 15. So you'll see some interesting ones in here. A lot of sports related things, which I find interesting because Russia has always been so proud of their ability to dominate a lot of sports, but Formula One is out of there. Other entertainment like Netflix out, they've withdrawn, as has had Roku and TripAdvisor and Universal. So Universal, I think initially may have said things like some of the other Disney and some of that they had suspended. They weren't going to intro the new movies and do different things, but now they're done. Carnival Cruise Lines, Etsy, homemade products, Expedia, travel. And here's some interesting ones. We saw, Carl's Jr. business as usual, Hard Rock Cafe business as usual, but Krispy Kreme, McDonald's out of there. Starbucks shut down. And if you've seen the news, then you've seen that McDonald's has kind of been taken over by the Russian government, and they're selling products, I think, except for the Big Mac, because that's a trademark infringement. So they can still sell, a 1/4 pound burger without calling it a quarter pounder, but the Big Mac is a little bit different. There's another Carnival and Norwegian Cruise Lines, Oceania Cruises, TJ Maxx, WePlay. So a lot of different things. British American Tobacco is in this category. Heineken and Carlsberg, both two of the largest brewers in the world. So they both have withdrawn from there, as well as Walker Shortbread Cookies. So they've taken their business. British Petroleum, Exxon, Shell, all exited Russia. The Dow Jones, S&P, and all those platforms was along with Vanguard. You'll see Delta Airlines in there, Deloitte, Emerson Electric. So Deloitte, of course, a consulting company, accounting company. Emerson Electric makes a lot of different things. KPMG, along with Deloitte, and PwC is in there. Qantas Air, Stanley Black & Decker, they make a lot of household products and a lot of tools that you might have in your garage. Another consulting company, Accenture. Bose, some high-end electronics. GoDaddy, so a lot of things with internet and internet support. Both HP and HP Enterprise have said we're done, along with IBM. Nokia, Jabil, Red Hat is a software company. Air Products is in that boat. Alcoa, Avery makes tons and tons of office things. Alcoa is aluminum, right? So all of that is being pulled out. BASF, Rio Tinto is a big mining company. I believe they're Australian, but I don't want to swear to that. They are a big mining company. Tata Steel, a lot of steel, one of the biggest steel manufacturers in the world, if not the biggest. They've pulled out. And then all of these international organizations, I find this interesting. The International Boxing Federation, CAT Federation, Ice Hockey Federation, Weightlifting Federation, all of those have pulled out. The International Cycling Union, International Olympic Committee, International Skating Union, and the Women's Tennis Association. And there are a couple of tennis players on the circuit, Russian, that are pretty good, very good. And then the Athletic Council, the Boxing Association and the Boxing Organization, the World Rowing Federation, and the Rugby Union. So all of these companies have said we're out. So you can see it varies across the industries, across the companies, but a lot of companies are doing that. So why do you care? Why do I care? Well, here's one of the things that Zelensky said at a symposium in the last couple of weeks. He says, if the enemy can reach us, it can reach every country in the European Union. And I'm sure that the enemy can reach the United States. He says, we strive to defend the principles of democracy and freedom. So he's giving a clear warning, and he's been trying to join the EU, and there's talks about that going on this week, whether they will let the Ukraine in there, which of course will anger Russia to no end, although I don't know how much angrier than they can get about invading a country, a sovereign country. So, but this is Zelensky's warning. So let me give you a little bit more information. Yale is the one that produced this study that I took all of these countries from, and they're continuing to monitor this. They had a CEO summit in June that was attended by 150 top CEOs and 35 mayors from major cities across the US. They did some surveys, of course. When they have this people in a room, you're going to do surveys. 100% of these leaders said they were inspired by Ukraine's courage and unity. So 100% of these top CEOs and mayors. 96% agreed that companies curtailing their Russian operations are doing the right thing. It's about 1,200 companies, and I'll show you another slide. This says 1,000, but it's actually about 1,200. And then these companies represent about 40% of the Russian gross domestic product. So these are significant players. This isn't some little kind of small business that says, hey, you know, we're not going to do this, and we're not interested. We're going to get out of here. We're going to do something. These represent 40% of the Russian GDP. So this is significant, and this could take them a while to come back from. So here's Zelensky's message. Amongst the things he pointed out were, he, of course, is advocating for companies to leave Russia, but come to the Ukraine. And he wants companies to these CEOs, he spoke to these CEOs and mayors, and he said, get out of Russia, but don't pay any taxes to the Russian government. Above all, don't pay taxes to the Russian government. And he said that there is going to be a lot of work to be done to rebuild Ukrainian cities. Cities like Mariupol that you might have seen have been estimated to be about 90% flattened by these weapons, and these weapons that the Russians are not supposed to be using in any kind, according to treaties that are in place. He encourages people to buy to hire Ukraine-based tech workers. As I said, there was a big software contingent workforce in the Ukraine, and many of these men and women are still available. Some are fighting on the line, so they're not exactly available now, but those skills they have, and they will have when this gets resolved. He's also advocating to hire Ukrainian refugees. This is an ongoing issue with the border countries to the Ukraine, where these people are fleeing. About 5 million have fled since February, and 12 million have fled their homes. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. He advocates for countering Russia by strengthening the Ukraine. As you know, he's been asking for all kinds of different weapons and support, and not only weapon support, but also support so that they can feed their troops, that they can make sure that they have, you know, uniforms and food and places to eat and sleep, and can maintain their lives as they're fighting for their country. He also expresses a concern that the world is barreling toward a global famine, and I'll show you some numbers on that. And he also urged this audience to secure the maritime corridors for exporting the Ukrainian agricultural exports. And I'll show you why that's so important. If I can get the slide to change here. So 12 million Ukrainians have left their homes. Many of them without IDs, without passports, without any kinds of papers, and without clothes and money. So they were forced to flee their homes when their cities were invaded, and they don't have, you know, basic essentials. So it's we had to flee a fire a couple years ago, and we had, you know, just a couple of hours maybe that they told us maybe they're, you know, be prepared. And then at the end, it was like, just grab what you can and go. So I know what we grabbed and didn't grab. And so I can understand that there's a lot of things that those people left behind that they would like to go back and get. And much of that is not there. It's been looted or it's been destroyed. There are 5 million of these refugees to foreign countries so far, and this number is growing. So 12 million Ukrainians without homes had to leave their homes. Some of them are still in the Ukraine, obviously, but 5 million have already gone to foreign countries. So that number is going to continue, that the people left homeless, if Russia doesn't stop their pounding of Ukraine, then that's going to grow. So there's lots and lots of jobs lost, as you can imagine, with these cities being flattened. But even more, there are very few open stores and grocery stores, which means there's limited food and water for people who do stay behind or try to maintain or are hanging around in some of the areas that are not completely flattened. But there's also limited medicine and first aid available because there's no grocery stores and there's no stores. So this is not a good situation. The Russians have done a lot of damage and left behind a lot of toxic waste, and they have left behind contaminated water in some cases where there might be a well, they have contaminated that. So they're really doing some devastating damage to what was of cities and towns. Many children in the Ukraine are not in school. So they haven't been since early February or maybe shortly thereafter. And in the areas that Russia is controlling, they've been ordered to eradicate the Ukrainian language from curriculums. So this goes to that genocide type of thing that you might hear about, that the UN is evaluating and whatever. So I'm not sure what they could do about it. But when you eradicate a language in the schools, that is not a good move. And even people that are getting paid from somewhere, have wages or pensions, it's very difficult to get the monies connected to the people that need it, that are relying on it. So it's a really not good situation. So again, this survey, the latest survey that they did was 1,372 companies. 385 of them are US companies, and many of these are Fortune 500 and even up. GM, Ford, you know, some of the larger companies are in that area, as you saw. And many of these names are recognizable names and products. So even if they're not United States brands, they're names like Siemens, Bayer, SAP that you recognize, that are companies from Germany, UK, France, and like I said, I found out Red Bull. I don't remember what country of origin that is, but they're not an American company, and I would have sworn they were. So the issues to supply chain are that these companies employ millions of workers worldwide. So these 1,372 companies have workers all over the world in all different shapes, forms, sizes, skill levels, industries, lots of variation. So some of you may work for some of those companies. Some of you may have some of those companies as your customers or your suppliers or both or all three. So we're all in this kind of woven together. Public companies here in the United States have stockholders, and these stockholders want returns on their company. So you may be a stockholder in one, you may be in part of a portfolio that has stock in one of these. So these, again, this weave gets tighter and tighter when you start looking at all of the different aspects. These companies have sales forecasts and budgets that they have obligated themselves to meet. So McDonald's is pulling out of Russia, but they still have sales forecasts and budgets to meet. They still have people. Initially, when they shut down the McDonald's stores, they were paying their workers. So on their withdrawal, I can't imagine that they're continuing to pay their workers, but they paid workers for some amount of time when they weren't getting any revenues. So that is not sustainable, and that's going to impact their bottom lines. So all that's going into what you're seeing in the stock market and what you're seeing in people hiring and people companies changing their outlooks for the year. And companies had planned to produce products in certain forecast volumes that were going to support not only, what is left, but into the Ukraine, into Russia. They were using products that came from there, either tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. They were using those raw materials in their manufacturing. So in order to make those products at those forecasts, they need all of that they were expecting to be available. And we're seeing, again, companies are being urged to relocate from Russia, and many of them are being urged to go to the Ukraine instead. Zelensky says, please come. So it's not necessarily the easiest place to set up shop today, but it might be very soon. So here are some of the commodities and why this affects supply chain so much. So the first commodity there is energy, and that comes in natural gas, which is a big, big part. The natural gas goes primarily into Europe, and the Germans have used a lot of that. A huge percentage of their gas requirements had come from from Russia. So they have taken steps to stop that, and they have suspended that brand new Baltic gas pipeline that was just finished. So they've suspended that, and it's suspended indefinitely. It may never get opened up. And that was supposed to be a big help to them. Energy is also related to products that are limited by increased prices and lack of availability. For example, in 2021, the UK shut down fertilizer plants because of the high energy costs, which were leading to shortages in things like carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide, okay, but I learned that carbon dioxide is essential to more than just a carbonated beverage. It encompasses everything from medical procedures to keeping food fresh. So if you can't make the fertilizer, you're not generating the off product of carbon dioxide, and you're not supporting that. So again, all of these things weave together, it becomes a very tight-knit fabric. Food, major, major issue. Russia and Ukraine produce about 30% of the world's wheat together, which is significant. Ukraine themselves produce about 50% of exported sunflower oil. And if you don't have sunflower oil on your in your pantry, which you might not, we don't, but you start looking at food ingredients, sunflower oil is in tons of things like chips that are made. So any kind of potato chip or taco chip, Doritos, all that kind of stuff, they need sunflower oil for that. And lots of other products utilize sunflower oil. Ukrainian corn has been going into China. So there's a lot of that. Turkey and Egypt rely on Russia and the Ukraine for almost 70% of their wheat imports. So if Turkey and Egypt can't get 70% or are getting significantly less than their wheat imports, it's going to affect that whole region. Ukraine is the top supplier of corn to China. And so if they can't, and they're not planting, right? They're not planting in a lot of the areas where they typically do because of the invasion. So it might not be this month, but if they haven't planted, then they're not going to be harvesting. If they can't harvest, then if there's nothing to harvest, then there's not more food going into those pipelines. So other production in other parts of the world can help reduce that if they're acting quickly enough and if they're stepping in. So there is opportunity because we do have capability and capacity to help with that. I don't know that we could, here in the United States, we could sell enough extra wheat to handle Turkey and Egypt, but we could take a chunk of that. And there's other parts of the world that can produce things like corn and wheat if they are doing it. But if they haven't started it now, it's almost July. So it's getting late in the year. I'm a farm girl, and I remember when we were planting and when we were harvesting, and you better be planting, you better have most of it planted by now. Transport is another area. So rail carries a small proportion of the total freight between Asia and Europe, but it's played a vital role recently with these transport disruptions, but the disruptions are growing more and more. Trains are being rerouted away from the Ukraine, and rail freight experts are currently optimistic that they're going to be able to keep these to a minimum, but they don't know for how long. So there's a lot of extra work that's going into that just to keep things like status quo. But you're seeing countries like Lithuania that are seeing their rail traffic severely affected by sanctions against countries like Russia. So prior to the invasion, ship owners started to avoid the Black Sea shipping, and insurance providers were demanding notification of them going into the Black Sea. So there's been forces trying to diminish that. And container shipment in the Black Sea is a relatively niche market on the global scale. One of the largest container terminals is in Odessa, which is in Russia. If this is cut off, Odessa's in the Ukraine. If it's cut off by Russian forces, the effects on Ukrainian imports and exports could be considerable up to devastating, with potentially drastic humanitarian consequences. Again, we're looking at basic foodstuffs, corn and wheat and sunflower oil, excuse me. Rising prices due to the war are a worry because there's not enough inflation, other things going on around the world. And freight rates are high and they're just getting higher. So it's compounding. Russia and Ukraine lead the global production of metals, metals like nickel, copper, and iron. They're heavily involved in the export and manufacture of other raw materials like neon, palladium, and platinum. Fears of sanctions on Russia increase the price of these, and they're still, who knows where they're going. Palladium has been up as much as 80% since about December of last year. And palladium's used in everything from automotive exhaust systems and mobile phones to the fillings in your teeth. The prices of nickel and copper used in manufacturing and everything. Think about how much copper wire goes into everything. And these prices have been going up. Aerospace industry, US, Europe, and Britain, again, titanium, they've been reliant on Russia for titanium for decades. Boeing and Airbus are looking at alternative suppliers. Boeing's already stopped buying from Russia. Airbus has not, but they are looking again for replacement alternatives. But it's not like you can go 16 other places on the globe because titanium is not found everywhere. US with microchips. So we've already had a shortage of microchips for, well, now at least a year and a half, and it's a little bit more than that because it started in late 2020. But Russia and Ukraine are key exporters of neon, palladium, and platinum, all of which are critical for microchip production. About 90% of the neon gas, which is used for chip lithography, originates from Russia, and 60% of that is purified by one company in Odessa. So they get the neon from Russia, and it goes to the Ukraine to get purified, and then it gets sold. So 60% of that, of 90% of the neon. So it's a huge number, over half of what's being used. And of course, the chip manufacturers are trying to increase their output. So it's difficult to increase the output when you've got constraints on your raw materials from an invasion that has, was not expected. So there's a lot of issues there and a lot of challenges. Again, here's what's affected. Here's some of the size of the markets with agriculture, wheat and barley. The fertilizer business out of Russia is 12.5 billion. These are Russian export figures. $12.5 billion in fertilizer, almost 12 billion in wood, 9 billion cereals, mineral fuels, including oil, $211 billion a year, gems and precious metals, $31 billion, iron and steel, just under 30, aluminum, 8, and then ores, slag, and ash, another 7 billion. Goods and machinery, including computers, is a $2 billion export business to Russia. Plastics is $6 billion. So if other countries and companies do what they're saying they're doing, which is stopping business in Russia and with Russia, then this is going to crash the Russian economy. If the Russian economy crashes, then that's got reverberations around the world too. It's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just, if you just think about it, it's going to have repercussions, and there's a lot of tentacles. So if you think there's a lot of tentacles on an octopus, think about just how many, and again, how tightly woven all of us living today, and consumers and employers and employees working in all these companies, everything gets wound pretty tight. So there's a lot of challenges from the invasion, and they're not just to Ukraine. So when people say, oh, I'm not really paying attention, I say, well, you know what, you should pay a little bit of attention, because it is going to affect you in some way. So you don't have to pay attention to the daily reports and some of that, but you need to think about what's going on there and see what companies are affected and what these companies are doing. Companies are flexing to adjust. Yeah, they flexed during the pandemic. They're going to flex again for whatever reason. So they're doing their best to make adjustments and to follow their own company's values, ethics, mandates, direction, strategies, to either shut down or not shut down, to move their business, to do different things. So there are a lot of companies. This is just 1,300, and these are pretty easy to follow companies. So there's a lot of thousands of other companies, small companies that don't hit anybody's radar screen like this on this YLE survey. There's shortages being created, and these shortages reverberate around the globe. So you can say you don't care about Ukraine's wheat, but if Ukraine doesn't make wheat, and they don't get food to Turkey and Egypt, and they don't get food to the other third world countries that need and rely on the wheat that comes from there for food, then there's going to be famines, and there's going to be trying to get some help, humanitarian help, to people who don't have food. So it does create opportunities, though. And I think that's really kind of what I want to end with, is that means we need to look for alternate sources of agriculture and food. So if there's been a lot of concern about how much capacity that we have in the United States, how much is really getting used, and are we producing as much as we can? I know we are not. So that might be an opportunity for businesses here to produce more, to try to backfill some of those areas. Companies are changing their cost structures. They're looking at what they can do. They've had to, if they've shut down offices. I told you Hilton shut down their corporate offices in Russia. So, okay, in Moscow. So what do they do with those people? Do they just let them go, spin them, whatever? And there were a lot of foreign workers in Russia, and then there's Russian workers in other parts of the United States. So that's all kind of trying to get sorted out. There's the rebuilding of Ukraine in some way, shape, or form that's going to happen eventually. So even if this goes on for much longer, there's going to be more devastation. And at some point, somebody's going to go in there and help them rebuild, whether it's Russia that takes over everything or it's the Ukraine that stays sovereign and they're able to get help from external areas. So there's potential for businesses to contribute to that and help to keep the growth of their business solid. So I say it's not too soon now to start evaluating what is going on, what is this affecting, what has the potential to affect your business. Monitor what's going on. If nothing else, look at the things like you already have, the chip shortages, what the types of metals that you buy, aluminum, nickel, iron, steel. Plan for your business to make these changes and incorporate whatever needs to be done differently, because it is time. It is not too early to start doing that. We don't know how this is going to end. We all pray that it will end soon, but it's not on the horizon at this moment. So that's what I have for Dynamic Dialogue today. In July, we might talk about employee retention, but we might talk about something else if it's happens to be on the radar. And then in August, we'll talk about the second half of 2022. But as I say, all these topics are subject to change. You can check out our website. You can contact me directly at jane@purplelink.net. I'm happy to take questions. If you want to have a 30-minute free call with me to talk about how Purple Link can help your business, I'm always happy to talk about supply chain topics. And Purple Link is ready and willing to help customers get more from their supply chains. We do have some online workshops coming up. If you're interested in getting a certified professional in supply management, the ISM certification, there's 3 exams required. I'm starting the first one in a class for the first one in a couple of weeks. On July 12th, I think is the target date. It might get pushed a little bit. And I'm hoping to do a couple other workshops, either Q3, they should be Q3, should be finished by September, but they might go into October too. These will be 3-week classes, an hour and a half a week, one on risk-based thinking and decision-making and one on Lean and Six Sigma. So if you're interested in those, you can contact me or go to the website and under events. So what I'm going to leave you with these 2 things today. I'm a big fan of Einstein. If you've attended these before, you know that I bring Einstein quotes in frequently. He said, the true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. And I think in times like this, we need some imagination. We can focus on the negative and we can focus on what's not working, or we can figure out how to help the situation and to do something different. So that also ties into creativity and innovation. So Theodore Levitt said, creativity is thinking up new things. Innovation is doing new things. And I think right now we need a little bit of both. We need to be thinking up some new ideas, new things, but we also need to be doing some things differently. So Theodore Levitt was German born in 1925 into a Jewish family in Germany. He moved to Dayton, Ohio at age 10. He eventually served in World War II for the Americans and got a PhD in economics from the Ohio State University. He's the gentleman that's credited, sometimes he's credited with creating, but more correctly, he's credited with popularizing the term globalization. And this is from an article that he wrote in June of 1983. So that word that we throw around a lot really got popularized by Theodore Levitt. He became the editor of the Harvard Business Review in 1985, and he died in 2006. But he left a mark on the world with the word globalization. And most of us have read the Harvard Business Review at some point in time and at least seen some cases and some different articles from that. It's a great publication. So I think we need intelligence and imagination, creativity and innovation. So I will leave you with that this month. I'm going to stop the recording and I'll take questions and comments.